Truly honored. And Betty Sue, it's indeed a pleasure and honor welcoming you from my side and welcoming you on behalf of participants as well. And with your permission, and also to share with our participants that the topic that we have today to explore together is about the powerful role of stories in creating our future. So as we set the space and as we create a container for next 60 to 90 minutes, I just would like to quote from a great book that you have wonderfully co-authored, edited, but you played a very central role, is The Power of Myth. Okay, and in that book, you have mentioned that Joseph Campbell, those of you on this forum who are not familiar with Joseph Campbell, we would really invite you and urge you to learn more about him, as he's someone who had a very deep impact, and he still is impacting all of our lives through his books and works. And I think you are lucky and fortunate to have worked with him closely, Betty Sue. So in that book, you have asked him that what is one of his favorite stories, and he mentions that he traveled to Japan for the International Conference on Religions, and over there he overheard one American philosopher asking one of the priests from Shinto cult or Shinto religion, as they call it, and that the philosopher asked that saint or a priest that I have visited many of your shrines, I have visited many of your ceremonies, and now, I want to ask you that I really don't understand your religion, I don't understand your philosophy, theology, etc. So I'm confused. Can you help me out? And that Shinto priest says that, you know what? I think I really do not have any philosophy. We really do not have any theology, but what we do is just dance. So
You,
I believe that the
I'm writing a book at the
so I
moment called Dancing with Destiny, and it's
wow.
I'm writing it at the moment because, in a way, that's what we do if we live in the present with joy, is that we dance with the emerging future. And so Otto Scharmer's work about theory U
Yeah.
is always about sensing the emerging future. And when we wrote the book that preceded his theoretical work, in which the theory U was presented, introduced, called Presence, we did it through dialogue, and I find that very
Yes.
interesting. The four of us met, Joseph Jaworski, Peter Senge,
Yeah.
Otto
Yeah.
Scharmer, and I, in Otto's house over a period of 2 years. And when we recorded our conversations, which I then edited into a book, and then
Oh,
we all rewrote parts of it, but mostly it was conversation. So I think a lot can come out of being fully present. We always started our conversation with a meditation,
hmm.
and that centering practice, which
Yes.
everyone was very familiar with,
Yeah.
um, established a space in which these thoughts arose. Um, they arose, and I think what's exciting about coaching is that you create a space in which the unexpected can arise for both the coach and the person who ostensibly is being coached. I think it's always two ways.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. So as we are beginning to dance in the moment, I also wanted to just connect what you have just mentioned. That as coaches, we often witness that a client comes to us where either they want to maximize their strengths, they may want to go to the next orbit, next level, or they might want to overcome something. But somewhere that story which is playing on their mind, which is their own, but or somebody else planted it, but they are uncomfortable with that story, and they want to move into the future, and they want to write new story in their mind before it actually manifests. So I feel that there is a lot of convergence and we would really like to learn from you and invite you to share with us that how the stories that impact us in the past, present, as well as future.
Well, as human beings, we're always in a story. That's how we make sense of things. We even dream in story. We're the storytelling
Mm-hmm.
animals. That's how we understand things. I started life off as a young person, as a pre-med student. I took
Uh-huh.
science classes and worked every afternoon after school, high school, in a hospital. And eventually I came to understand, the way you understand your life's work emerging from within. I
Mm.
began to understand that yes, I wanted to alleviate suffering, but that I was called to alleviate the suffering that comes about through stories, through it's, I guess you'd say it's unnecessary suffering. If I fall and break my leg, I would call that necessary suffering. I go to the hospital. But so much of our suffering just comes from the stories that
Mm.
we're telling about who we are and what's possible. So I began to then switch to literature, literary criticism, and understanding mythology and the stories that have created us in this world and as human beings. So when I talked with students and sometimes do coaching, although I'm not a professional coach, it's almost always when someone is feeling stuck, there's almost always a story they're telling. And as you do a lot of coaching, you begin to sense who they are behind that story that's bigger than the story. And it's a way of,
Absolutely.
yeah, you already know the person that's already there. It's not that you give them anything. The future that they are is already present. So it's a matter of learning to constellate the unconscious, usually the unconscious story, and often they've inherited it from parents or something. You constellate that story, and once you can tell the story and see that it's just a story, you move on, and maybe you move on to the next story or second. I don't know. We human beings tend to keep throwing nets over ourselves and trapping ourselves, but that's why it's helpful to have a coach to help you see the net that you've trapped yourself in. Um, yes, it's so much about coming to see, bringing that story to light and seeing its limitations, because every story is a limitation to that infinite aspect that we're all in touch with.
Mm. Right. And as if I can share with you what was coming up for me as you were narrating this, that so if somebody realizes, first it's about awareness about the story which is playing on, and then finding its relevance or irrelevance in current context or with context to the future, and then perhaps detach from that unfamiliar story or unhelpful story and attach yourself with the new story, which will actually helping you to move towards the future. Is that what I have understood you correctly?
Yes, and if you learn that the new story you're attaching yourself to is also a story, that's very helpful for the next stage
Absolutely. That's
development.
correct. Mm.
So sometimes when I do workshops, I do a little exercise. And by the way, anyone here listening is free to take this exercise and use it.
Uh-huh.
Very powerful. Um, I divide the room up into groups of two, and I ask them, tell the story of your life to your partner. And then after a while, I, ring a little bell and say, okay, partner B, tell the story of your life to your partner. The only
Mm-hmm.
rule is you can't talk. You have to be only a listener. And the story of your life, you have to use facts. I mean, it's not true confessions or anything. I don't mean that, but just the story. But here's the trick. I have three different plots to this story. So the first time I say, tell the story of your life as a hero story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tell the story of your life as a victim story.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, as you do that, and some people are very resistant to the hero story, other people are very resistant to the victim story. You see, as you tell the story to each other, that it's the same facts. You can't change the facts. I mean, that's what's happened. I was born a female. I was born in Texas. Those are facts. Um, but when you change the narrative, when you change the story, the plot, the agency changes too. If you're the victim, it's the circumstances that have the power. If you're the hero, you're the one that has the power. And then
Mm.
I introduce a third narrative. tell the story of your life as if there were a purpose to life, and that purpose was to learn, and that everything that happened is neither bad nor good. It was just a teacher, because we're
Mm.
all on what's been called the suffering planet. This is a
Mm.
planet of slow learners. So suffering really helps you learn.
Yeah.
So um, when I do this and then have a discussion afterwards, I say that, many of us are not in charge of the facts that happened to us, where we were born, who our parents were, the accidents that happened in our lives, but we're always in charge of the narrative. We're the storytellers of the narrative, even if the facts are there. So what we get confused with as human beings is we take the narrative, which is in our power, as reality, and it's not. We have so much more creative freedom in telling our story than we think we do. So
Mm.
part of the job of a coach is to loosen up the connection of reality to the narrative, and to see that's just a story, and that the stories that we tell shape a lot of what we experience, because we're always experiencing it through the filter of the story we're telling.
Betty, so
Mm.
I just would like to step in for a minute, if I may.
Please
How
do.
long does this exercise take typically?
Oh, as long or short as you want, because I give them about 3 minutes to tell their story, and then I blow a whistle or something, and it stops them in the middle of the story. Because it's not about getting the story across in this exercise. It's about observing in yourself the feelings you have when you tell your story as a hero story, and the resistances and the feelings you have when you tell your story as a victim story. I once did this exercise at the Aspen Institute, and with CEOs. And as it happens, they were all male, and they were there with their wives. And so in this little exercise, it turns out that all the men could easily tell the hero stories, and some actually refused to tell the victim story. They even refused to participate in telling the victim story. And all the women, none of them felt comfortable telling the hero story. All of them could tell the victim story very easily. And that was such a shocking thing that many of them skipped a lunch that followed this exercise, and went walking together to explore this, why one was telling only the hero story and one only the victim story, and that maybe there was a third story, another story that they could come up with for the relationship. That was very eye-opening for me. But the exercise can take as long or short as you want, because people can talk on and on, and I blow the whistle and stop it and say, okay, now partner B. So you can do it for half an hour, you can do it for 10 minutes. It's usually about 15 or 20 is all I allot for it.
Now, the reason I
Mm.
asked is, unfortunately, in a webinar format, we don't seem to have the breakout room possibility. Otherwise, I would have loved to have broken this into breakout rooms. But if there is someone else who is willing in the audience, if they would like to come forward and be the participant, would that be a possibility for you to take them through this exercise in terms of listening to them as a hero, the victim, and with a purpose in mind? Or would that
It
tell
would,
other
but
people? Yeah.
it would, but this is such a simple exercise that rather than using our dialogue time here, you can do it with anybody right after we
Right.
finish.
Yeah.
You,
Okay.
you don't, in
Brilliant.
other words, you don't need me or you are usual to do it, because it is truly simple. Anyone can do it. And I've had people all over the world write me and say they've done this. So I'm happy to do it if you think it would be useful, but actually I think of all the exercises I do, this is the easiest.
Okay.
Doesn't require me or anybody else.
Yeah.
Just
There's a
very,
there's a question from Rekha here saying that
Yeah.
what differentiates creating of a story of the future vis-a-vis plain wishful thinking? What's the difference between the fantasizing and the storytelling?
I think wishful thinking, I remember a song my mother used to sing at night. A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. And those are lyrics to a song. I think there's nothing wrong with wishful thinking as long as you know that it's a scenario, it's a story, and you don't get caught in it. What's harmful about wishful thinking is ignoring the facts as they come along, because you're so tightly clinging to the story of the future. That's why I work with scenarios, not forecast. Wishful thinking is a kind of forecast usually. It's one thing. Whereas scenarios are multiple stories of the future. What could happen, not what should happen or what will happen. So let me go back to other aspects of this wishful thinking. The job of leadership is always to tell the story of the future. That's what a leader does. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Moses, I see a promised land. Now you could say, I have a dream and I see a promised land. You could say that's wishful thinking, but actually in terms of a leader, the job of a leader is to present a vision of the future that's so powerful that your heart responds to. So it's more than wishful thinking because it has a lot of energy and power to it and actually moves people. So I'm very big on aspirational futures, even working with Shell on scenarios, Shell Global on scenarios. We have one scenario that I helped write called Sky, which is how the world could get to net zero emissions by 2070. And it's aspirational, the first time Shell has ever done an aspirational scenario. And it really, you could say, some have said, oh, that's pie in the sky, that's really wishful thinking. But we had our modeling team work at every aspect of it. So this is where science comes in relation to wishful thinking to produce good outcomes. Our modelers, they modeled every part of it. So it actually is doable with enough human will and heart behind that vision of net zero emissions by 2070. So wishful thinking that's a very good question because it's a very complex subject.
That's
Right.
so totally amazing. So if I may, then I'll hand it over to Ujjwal. Just a thing that occurs to me, question that occurs to me is, so what were their stories that you told yourself that made you into who you are now?
The story I told myself is of a truly that it came from a mystical experience I had as a child, that the universe was essentially love. If that's the case, there's nothing to be afraid of. If that's the case and you remain totally open, then adventures come your way that have your name on them. There's so many choices one could make, but something comes and you know that this is what Dancing with Destiny is about. You know that it's you somehow. It's connected to your deepest heart, and when that comes, without regard to my career, I just followed it. So that's why I had one adventure after another and met these remarkable people along the way, because I danced with destiny. And by destiny, I don't mean there's something laid down in stone the moment you're born, but it's as if the loving universe creates itself around you to nurture you. And as it nurtures you and you grow, other experiences come along. I can't prove any of that. I can't prove that there's some kind of love that moves the sun and the moon and the other stars, as Dante said. I can't prove that. And I'm very interested in science, and I don't try to. I don't try to convince anyone of that as a fact or as a reality. But that's what led me on my adventures.
What you say in some senses reminds me of in that movie Infinite Potential, in one of the David Bohm statements when he converses with J. Krishnamurti. He says this, that I realize sometimes that I'm a particle and sometimes I'm a wave. I'm pretty much in the quantum state. And when I saw that, I felt it was pretty much the same. So in a sense, what happens when you tell yourself these stories, whether they sort of descend on you serendipitously or you are looking at something different, that you are no longer a particle, you are not in that rigid boundary of time and space, and you are really floating into multiple spaces. So the mystical experience that you're talking about, is it something that you could share so that people can learn from it, or is it private? In case, what was that came up with that mystical experience?
I was 7 years old in Abilene, Texas. I woke up in the middle of the night And there was a being of light at the head of my bed, which was all love and wanted me to go through the wall with it. I mean, I felt that. And I saw immediately how that could be done. That is, I saw the molecules arranging themselves so there were spaces and you could just go through the space. And I said, no, I didn't want to do that. I was afraid and I didn't want to do that. And here's the point is after I said no, that was okay. Now I grew up with strict parents, loving, but strict. If you said no, it would not be okay to, but the love that came forth was just the same as before. It was the most powerful love. And as I say, I had a very loving family. It was the most powerful love I'd ever experienced before or since. And then the being or whatever faded away, and I began crying because I knew I would never see it again. That was just it. So it led me on a quest to understand the reality of that experience, if it was real. And I finally gave up because I am kind of a scientist at heart. There's no way to prove that it was anything but chemicals going off in my 7-year-old brain. So I quit trying to understand the reality of it and just began to operate on the meaning of it. That is, as a metaphor. If it were true, if it really had happened, and it was an experience that I can't deny and that I've always felt, what difference would that make for the way I live my life? What would that mean about the reality of life if I took it as reality? So that's been the lodestar. That was the experience that set my course. And if someone said, well, it was just an hallucination, I wouldn't argue with them, but it certainly was a powerful one.
But as you say it, there's a bit there if you were to write dotted and then this happened. So what was it that dotted and then this happened? What happened?
Well, once you have an experience of unconditional love that's beyond any experience you've had before, you begin, I began to see the unnecessary suffering. That was one of the things I began to see. I began to see that most of the unhappiness around me at school was kind of arbitrary, was totally unnecessary. And it had its negative effects in that it kind of alienated me from the reality around me because I didn't see it the same way as most of the other kids. And that wasn't necessarily an advantage growing up when you want to be accepted, liked, popular. So mostly I just kept it secret. I've only begun talking about it lately, if at all, because it just makes you different. People don't want to be different. As a kid, I didn't want to be different. But it made all the difference in my life because everything I've done has come out of that quest to understand what that would mean. I think when you meet a guru whom I've never had that experience with a guru, say, or a master or a human being in that form, but I think people sometimes have that same, I know Ram Dass did have that same response. It changes them forever if they feel it as a reality.
You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the experiences that I had was when at a point in time in my life, I was working with people as a healer, and I met people who had had near-death experiences. And those experiences, and these were genuine, and people very often think that when they write about the near-death experiences, that somebody thinks that they're dying, they are going through this tunnel of darkness, and suddenly there's a light at the end of it, and someone, that old guy with a beard playing on a harp or something, tells them, okay, it's all right, now you can go back, or whatever it is. But many of them, what they said was pretty similar, whether it was an old man with a harp or whatever it was. At least I must have spoken to about a dozen people, and they all said the same thing, that under one circumstance or other, where they had this experience of pretty much dying, and suddenly there was this light, and there was something that said to them, go back. And they went back. And for them, after that, life was never the same. because
Yeah.
first of all, they lost totally all fear of death.
Yeah.
So like you said, they knew they were different. And some of the struggles, of course, were in trying to conform with other people. It enormously changes your life. And I personally, honestly, I mean, yeah, the people who are lucky have gurus, but I have a very healthy disrespect for gurus, having had the experiences that I have had. But my own experiences when I was doing the Vipassana meditation for about 10 days was that I entered into that kind of a space where um, I was absent completely. And it took me a long time to be able to replicate that, but eventually I was able to. And so that becomes your safe sanctuary to go to. If there is anything else that is bothering you, you enter that space and do that. So going back to your works on power of myth, for example, which Ujjwal was talking about. So tell us a little bit about your experiences of working with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers and some of the anecdotes from that book's creation.
Yes. Before I do, I should add that I worked with someone on a book published anonymously. Well, it says by 2 students. That's in the Alice Bailey series. I don't know if you know that. It's a compilation of the Tibetan master on death. It's called Death, the Great Adventure. And it's about the state. And so I used to teach a course at the University of Texas on death and literature. And I met many of these same people, the kind of people you met who had been in near-death experiences. It's really quite phenomenal. So I just wanted to say I've had that experience too. It's very important. I think it was Dr. Johnson, the 18th century dictionary maker, who said, depend upon it, when a man is about to be hanged, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. There's something about death that seems part of the meaningfulness of life. You can't have a story without an end. And the fact that there is an end makes everything so precious, so dear. It's why we love flowers, why so many beautiful things are precious to us, or so many short-lived things are beautiful to us, because of that death. And it's why in Greek mythology, the gods are kind of trivial. All they do is sit around and drink and, play around with each other and look at what the humans are doing. And if you read the Iliad, at the level of the gods, they're kind of, they're just not very serious people or beings. It's the humans who have tragedy, who call us to the great adventure. It's the heroes, not the gods, in Greek mythology. So I just say that the importance of death, of the ending of anything, of the limitations that we have, even the limitations of being in a certain gender or living in a certain place, the limitations themselves are part of the keenness of our experience. And I think in coaching, this is important too, because people sometimes see factual limitations as maybe they're living in the wrong city, or their living circumstances seem to limit their aspirations. But sometimes these very limitations are the means whereby the intensity and the energy creates the presence of something so remarkable and great and particular that you couldn't have it any other way. It's such a mystery. It really is. But to answer your question about the power of myth, so much in my life has been synchronicity. I just, so, it's like a story, but you'd say, well, what can I learn from that story? It was just kind of magic. But, and this could be a long story or a short story, because every synchronicity has a synchronicity before it. So I could start with the synchronicity that when I was getting my PhD at the University of London, I was starving to death. My husband worked in a place with 5-year-olds, and he was not being paid very much. And so my tutor found a job, even though it was slightly illegal, for me to teach Jacobean drama, about which I knew nothing, but I had to do something to not starve to death. And so the only Jacobean drama I knew was The Alchemist. So I went to the British Library where I was working on my PhD and opened a book, and I saw this thing called Psychology and Alchemy by C.G. Jung. I had no idea who that was. Great Swiss psychoanalyst and very worth reading. So I started reading and I opened it up to a page that had an explanation of a dream, in effect, that I'd had the night before. So I thought, oh, I'm on an adventure. So I ended up reading all of Jung's works. So when Campbell came along, I read Campbell because here's the whole point about that, and then how I got to do the book. Because what made Campbell so meaningful and popular was not that he was a great mythologist, because there are a lot of great academic people who are academic professors in myth that you've never heard of. What made him so inspiring to people is that he had a Jungian perspective, and he had a lot of experience with Buddhism and Vedantism, and he had met Krishnamurti when he was going off to work on his PhD, his dissertation. He'd taken a ship, as you had to in those days, over to Europe. He was going to write on the Arthurian legend, and the ship over, he met Krishnamurti. They began talking, and he realized that these hero myths were all over. They weren't just in Arthurian myths, they were global. And it changed his life. He never did get his PhD because academia is about knowing more and more about less and less. So I knew about Campbell that the secret to Campbell was Jung, was a psychoanalytic basis, so that he told stories that were meaningful to us, not just as if they were, dry historical stories. So I met Bill Moyers accidentally at a political cocktail party, really. And the guy, I was on the way out, and the lights dimmed because the political thing that it was a fundraiser for somebody running for an office. And when the light went out, you had to stop. You couldn't leave. He was going to speak. And I just happened to stop next to someone I'd never heard of or knew, who was Bill Moyers. This was many years ago. And it took a while for the guy to get on stage. We started talking. He said, "What are you most interested in?" I said, "Well, at the moment, I'm most interested in mythology." And he had just done something with Jackie Kennedy, Jackie Onassis, but about the way she had staged the funeral for JFK, and he had just done a little tiny interview with Joseph Campbell. This is in the 70s. And she recognized that Campbell understood what she was trying to do with the deep symbolism of that funeral cortege with the riderless horse, and that she really she recognized that he understood it. And Bill Moyer said, I got more feedback from that one little piece of my journal, Bill Moyer's journal at that time, than anything I'd done. And so I'm going to do a longer series when I can raise the money. And you seem so interested in it, maybe you can help me. Well, of course I was interested. Okay, so now we're talking 15 years later that it happened, that we interviewed Joe. So I was the series consultant. I interviewed Joe. I worked with Jackie Onassis on the book. So many stories about this. At one point, the synchronicities were coming so hot and thick that Bill Moyer's assistant left the room. She said, "I just can't stand this." It didn't fit her belief system, all the things that were happening that were synchronous. Anyway, I have to stop because I could go on and on about that magical journey with Joseph Campbell and the power of myth.
Ram, I feel like asking a question at this moment. Can I go?
You're on mute. You're on mute, Ram.
Please, Ujjwal, please go on. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So you just spoke about a belief system, and that's exactly a minute ago I was thinking. So that is another synchronicity, perhaps. I was thinking that we were talking about the stories, and stories also have emotions, or stories evoke emotions also. And are these stories also have a base in the belief system, the way we are conditioned ourselves, and also the values that we respect or we follow? So just wanted to check with you that, do the stories create beliefs, or beliefs create stories, or they are independent of both values and beliefs? before I go to something which I wanted to check with you at the core of that, which is purpose. So,
Well, just to answer quickly your first question about the chicken or the egg, you can already see I'm going to answer.
yes.
Interdependent. There are stories that have cultural aspects to them.
Mm-hmm.
But any deep story that has lasted through the centuries also has a human aspect, so that when we read the stories, we really resonate. The story of the Buddha, living a sheltered bubble existence, going out and seeing a sick person for the first time, seeing a poor.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what culture you're from. You get that
Yeah.
because it recreates the first time as a child that you understood, oh, sickness, oh, death, oh, you have these realizations. So the Buddha story is all our stories. So the
Yeah.
deepest, most important stories, the stories that last, are both cultural and deeply universal.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Lead to purpose. What is your question about purpose?
Yeah. Yeah. So, can stories reshape the purpose? And if yes, there is an adjoining question from Kimberly there, that if somebody has a purpose, but their story they are telling to themselves is a victim story, so how perhaps we can encourage them to reshape their view and connect them with their higher purpose, so that that energy pulls them there towards the action.
Sometimes a victim story hides the real purpose. Sometimes purpose gets stuck in the will. And to me, purpose is never in the will. It's never self-generated. So it's always renewed. So you
Mm,
always have to be open to purpose shifting. You always have to check in for purpose. And
yes.
for some people who work 20 years to accomplish one thing, when they check in, the purpose is always on fire and there. But there's some people who hold purpose like a to do, I should, generated
Yeah.
solely from the will. And the more purpose is generated just from the will and not from the heart, or what I would say from the future. And this is where it gets theory and very kind of mystical.
Yeah.
To the
Yeah.
extent that purpose is generated just from the will, it can become brittle. It can become almost controlling sometimes, and it has a different feeling about it because if it's generated just from your personal will, nobody else can enter into it and help you. The point about a purpose that is generated from the field of the future, and
Mm,
I say that my first subtitle for the book Presence was
feel
Human
of the
Presence,
future. Yeah.
Purpose and Field of the Future, which they
Right.
changed. But anyway, I'm just saying, because
Yeah.
purpose is not a self-generated thing. Purpose comes from the field of the future, uniting. That's why I call it dancing with destiny. So
True.
purpose is alive. It renews itself. It doesn't. You're not. It's not self-generated. Although you have to be willing to be
Mm,
a servant to the purpose for it to emerge in you, but it's being a servant to the purpose is different from willing the purpose. And sometimes people
mm,
with will can be very exciting to be around for a short period of time. And then
that's correct.
the flowers around them begin to wilt. And we see that in the history of tyranny and the history of all kinds of historical figures who are up on the top of the mountain for a while and then are undone by their own decisions or by the will of the people, or because power is always in the long term only given to you. You don't seize it. But will is definitely a very interesting, problematic thing to coach about, because you don't want to dampen anyone's will, but on the other
Mm,
hand, directing where the purpose comes from, it's always a dance. It's always interactive. If it's large enough to require, and almost every big purpose is, to require the help of other people. I
yeah.
was
Very,
I was director of the Johnson Presidential Library for 7 years, and
yeah.
met many politicians and presidents, and that was an interesting experience. One thing I learned about LBJ, of course, my whole board, people who worked with him, and he was not very nice. He was really hard to work with. I mean, he treated people miserably. And, but they all loved him because he was doing it on behalf of a larger purpose, civil rights in this case. So they always felt he wasn't calling them the 2 a.m. to do something for him. He was doing it for this other purpose. So they were willing to work themselves to death. So here's someone with an LBJ with an enormous amount of will, who was not attractive, was not, love everywhere at all, but who was on fire with the limited amount of time. Here's where death comes into it again. He knew he had a limited amount of time to pass this thing on the back of John Kennedy. I mean, he was shameless in saying, we've got to do this for John Kennedy, whom everyone was mourning at the, we've got to do this. He would make up things and say, we've got to do this for John Kennedy, And Martin Luther King himself said Kennedy could never have done this. It was Johnson. But it was because he got all this help from everywhere, from all the people who had to make it happen. One person could never make anything big happen. Yeah. Because he was on fire with a purpose. He couldn't have willed it. It was one man could not have made that happen, passing through Congress again. I mean, it was just quite a thing. So I learned so much from living with him, even though he wasn't alive then, of course. But to all the archives and all the archivists who knew him and all the researchers who came there, and Mrs. Johnson, whom I did get to know very well. But, you learn a lot about how something big is accomplished, something big in society is accomplished. And the will, it's not just self-generated. It's, it is a complex thing, the will. So when you're coaching someone in relation to purpose, it's a very large conversation.
Wow. So that prompts me to ask next question to you, if I can. That we are right now, we are focused on the individual stories or stories affecting individuals. And you also have worked with global corporations like Shell, and then you have also consulted NASA and FBI and all of them. So what are some of those stories that you see currently shaping up at a global level? And perhaps, do you feel that as coaches, what we can do to shape up a different narrative? Because to pandemic or all of that stuff, the general sense in the world is the compromise of psychological safety. So how, as coaches, perhaps we can refer to certain stories, or if you could direct us, guide us, that what are the stories that you see that is shaping up globally, and how we can perhaps help advance the human purpose of, as Joseph Campbell was mentioning, that is the stories of to come alive. Stories are of our life purpose and perhaps nothing else. It's not of the past, it's about the purpose of living. That's why all these stories are there.
I think we're at an inflection point in the history of humankind. And it's not so much just about the stories, although it is, but about the storytellers. I mean, look here, we're all equal little squares on this Zoom platform. Yeah. We're all, for the first time in history, and it happened almost overnight, we are meeting without regard to space. This morning I was in Paris talking with the OECD conference. Wow. Here I am in Bangalore. I mean, so we have the opportunity amongst the people who have purpose and can feel the emerging field of the future. Yeah. We have the opportunity through sheer numbers and through being storytellers all over the world to shape a transition to a new world, a world of justice and love and the sustainability of the planet. This is a real inflection point. And I've just finished writing scenarios for the future of, these are COVID scenarios for Shell. And I also worked on the COVID scenarios for the World Energy Council. And they're different types of scenarios. And so I've read a bunch of the COVID scenarios. But with Shell, I started with 3 value systems that we could use to respond to the crisis. And one is security, fear, going back into our own nationalities or our own little bubbles. Another is wealth, where we try to return to business as usual as soon as possible. I'm being these are thumbnail sketches of much more complex stories, of
Sure,
course.
sure.
But one I called Health, because there you take off more slowly at first, um, renewing the economy perhaps, but you try to do it in a way that creates societal health. And health comes from a root for the word wholeness, so that you're interested not so much in growth, which is an economic value, but in health, which contains growth. Economic growth is part of health of a society,
Yeah.
but it's a larger concept. Um, and I think we have the opportunity to tell that story globally for the first time. So just as after the great crisis of World War II, we developed international institutions, now after this great crisis, it's possible to develop global stories.
Wow.
And that takes individual practitioners, not government institutions as after World War II. It takes all of us storytellers beginning to tell the same story as human beings, no matter where we're acting, what we're doing, whether we're in government or not.
Yeah, yeah. And that recalls something for me that it is said in systems thinking that when system is about to collapse, individuals rise to the occasion, and then the new system is formed.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay,
That's
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 wonderful.
that's the point, the inflection point where we are. That's the great
Yes,
opportunity we have now, if we don't lose hope, and is to recreate the world anew.
yes, yes. So could I also check with you about your reading on the role of emotions in creating our stories or hearing our stories or reshaping our stories? So maybe as coaches, we also work with the emotions, the resultant energy impact on them, how the emotions are felt in their body, and then how do we leverage that towards helping them to move towards the actions towards their desired future. So it would be great if you could throw some light on the role of emotions in stories and vice versa.
Wow, that's a huge subject too. Huge. I remember reading that Goethe, the great 18th century poet, said when you're telling a story to a child and their eyes widen when you get to the witch, dwell on the witch. you know, keep going where the eyes widen, because that's the
Yeah.
emotional connection. And you do that with coaching. You can tell when something catches the person you're talking with. But I think it's very useful for people to become aware of the emotions as they arise, because very often emotions, especially the so-called negative emotions, are reactive. But actually, if you can turn that into, instead of acting on those, to be aware of them as information, that they give you information about how you're perceiving on an unconscious level, they can be very useful. So I think as a coach, there are two jobs in the emotional realm for a coach, two main jobs, many more, but one is to help the person you're coaching become aware of emotions and to observe them, not to squash them, and then to read them, to see the information that they're giving.
Mm-hmm.
And because quite often people think that they're making progress, and they are, but there's so many layers to the unwinding of a certain story that has them stuck, that only emotions will give you a clue that, ooh, that story is still going on in a much more hidden form. And so that the emotions as they arise give both you and the client a lot of information. But the second thing a coach needs to do in relation to emotion, and this is most important of all, is to be a container of love. And by love, I mean unconditional acceptance of
Mm.
what comes up, because only in such a container of unconditional acceptance will you get to the bottom of things. If at any point the person you're coaching feels judged, at that point, a deep communication stops. So um, you have to be the unconditional container, which means love. That doesn't mean you don't have judgments on things. It doesn't mean anything goes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the emotional container, which is
Yes.
unconditional acceptance of what the person is saying. Even if you point out that that behavior might not benefit them, the container is
Absolutely.
one of acceptance.
Okay. Absolutely, and that connects me to and Ram, you can step in whenever you feel like. So Dr. Carl Rogers, another great psychiatrist and psychologist, he used to say that unconditional positive regard is something which is the primary condition for a client to open up. And with that, if you continue to hold on and continue to explore, and you, in case you are not reaching the space of non-judgmental approach, at least how can you successfully suspend the judgment so that the client feels that he or she is the center of universe for those moments?
Well, you have to observe the emotions arising in yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's how you send it.
Yes.
I think that requires some probably some practice. I would recommend every coach have some kind of practice of whether it's meditation or what of self-observance in a consistent way, so that you do notice that, and that allows you to be supple in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, with your permission, would take a pause and check with our participants if they wish to share any questions, if they wish to express anything on the chat box before we move forward. And that will be great. It's a great opportunity to ask her questions.
Usually, your bandwidth
She's
is,
a global expert on scenario planning and macro and micro view of, I'll just go off the video for a while.
yeah.
Thank you. So it's a great opportunity to check with her any questions that you may have as a coach, maybe as a person, how stories can shape us and our clients and move towards the desired future. So there's a question from Rekha. How does one ignite the practice of telling or creating our stories?
Um, I think your story is sort of told as it's happening. Um, if you're talking about a story about yourself, um, it sort of well, I can give one little practice that will help. I give it to my students at some point. I would be talking. I was teaching literature at the University of Texas, and so I was trying to get them to understand what it would be if you felt, as the medieval people did, and as the Greeks to some extent did, that the universe was full of messages for you. What would it mean to be like that? So I would say, all right, for the next 10 minutes, leave this classroom, go out on campus, ask a question, but it has to be a question you really care about the answer to, not a question like, what's the assignment going to be tomorrow? Because you don't care enough about that, but a really deep, deep question to do with your life. And you will get, just trust that in 10 minutes, you'll get an answer from the universe. So it always worked. That is, the students would go out and they'd come back with these funny grins on their face. And one of them, I remember, said he was wondering if he could practice architecture. He wanted to be an architect and also have a family. And he walked over to the architecture school, and there was a child, very rare on campus, a child was playing in front of the architecture school. So he got his answer that way. Another girl went out and wondered if her boyfriend loved her. I mean, this is, 18-year-olds. And
Yeah.
she sat under a tree and got no answer. And so she stood up to go back to class after the 10 minutes, and she'd been sitting on a piece of paper that had been cut out in the shape of a heart. I could go on with, different stories.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the universe, if you are in touch with the universe, if you are interacting with life as it happens, you get feedback, you get answers, everything becomes meaningful and rich.
Mm.
And so your story develops insofar, there are really multiple stories, but you begin to dance, dance with things as they, you're the wave, you're the particle. That's
Yeah, that was
Right.
amazing. It reminds me, there was a time when I was working with the enterprise that Sir John Whitmore set up with Timothy Galloway, performance consultants in UK. And Timothy Galway wrote these books of Inner Game of Life and stuff like that. So he was doing his first train the trainer kind of program, and I was invited to be there. So one of the things that he did was exactly what you're saying. He says now, and this was in the Queen's Club, out just in the suburbs of London, which is the Mecca of tennis. Not Wimbledon, but Queen's Club is where it all started. So the field outside, he said, get out there and then do whatever you want. Talk to the cows, talk to the trees, talk to the sky, do what you want. Put out your question and come back with an answer.
You're kidding.
Absolutely.
Wow. I didn't know.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's something.
So I wandered around a bit, and then there were a couple of cows around there, sort of looked at them for an answer, nothing came, looked at the grass, and then something told me, I looked up and I was looking at the clouds, at the sky and the clouds. And honestly, there were some extraordinarily profound answers which came so powerfully at that point in time. And so we went back after the half an hour or whatever it is. And several of us had tears in our eyes as we recounted what we experienced. So I totally agree with, we just have to have the courage. Like you earlier said, this will, I would use the word ego for it. There's a barrier that we have in terms of thinking that this is what we are, and which leads me to a question which perhaps when we can, depending upon, take your time, I really would like to understand. You talked about scenario planning. A lot of us are very interested in the larger ecosystemic aspect of what coaching can achieve. Like Peter Hawkins in UK, Eve Turner, they're talking about the climate change, and the whole conference is about Awake, Aware, Rise. It's about that creating that larger collective consciousness, as it were, which is to me a mirror image of the collective unconscious of Jung and all that stuff which Joseph Campbell talked about and related to all that. So there's a phenomenal connection, and one of the things that you said also resonated for me. Purpose can never be willed. The purpose happens. Now, in the Vedic psychology, more than Buddhist, the concept is about what is called the prarabdha karma, which is the purpose that is, the belief is that death is transition. Just like Einstein's relativity theory, energy is permanent, it can never be destroyed. So the energy that we have recreates itself, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in a new set of clothes, and you appear in a new body somewhere. And that's not an accident, even though you think it's an accident. That is conditioned by the thoughts with which you live your previous existence. And along with that, there is a set of whatever stuff that is out there which determines. Today, neuroscience-wise, we know that there is a part of our brain we've tapped, can recreate the memories that we have had from the reptilian age, the reptilian brain. So when all this adds up, so at one level, we have the very deep individual unconscious, and that individual unconscious connects with the larger collective unconscious or conscious, whichever way you want to term it. I see most of Joseph Campbell's work and even David Bohm's work in that space. How do we expand from our individual consciousness or unconsciousness into that larger collective consciousness, unconsciousness? So coming to the specific of it, with your experience in terms of applying it, like you said, be it the COVID scenario planning or something else, climate scenario planning or whatever it is with Shell or anybody else, what do you think can happen? I mean, this is also in line with what Sharma calls as emerging future. So how does it all tie up?
In the way that you've described, everything you've said ties together, but I don't know how it ties up, because it remains to be seen. It remains to be done by all of us. It remains. I think all of the wisdom that we're so lucky to have from so many different cultures. I don't know any of it that contradicts any other. The wisdom that's lasted from every culture and religion is coherent. I remember once Father Thomas Keating saying that, you know, when the priests get together, they argue. When the mystics get together, they don't. And it's one reason the Dalai Lama has been so open to all world religions and to science. It's the priests that, and it's not, this is nothing against priests. It's, if what I'm saying is that if you follow the dogma, you'll see the differences. If you follow the spirit, you'll see the likenesses. And it behooves us, if we want to create a better future, to follow the spirit. And that is not the reactive emotions, but the sense of purpose that emerges from the dance of our will and what happens in the universe. I remember Campbell saying, and I remember the beautiful gesture he made. I did all the pre-interviews with him and wrote the briefing book for Bill. So I remember his hand gestures when he said this. He believed you should follow your bliss. It's almost as if you're implanted that the thing that has you find your purpose is not so much, he says, it's not so much what you will, but what you love, your bliss. And he used that term, Satchitananda. He said, I don't know my being, I don't know, but I know my bliss. And here's what he did with his hands. He said, when you follow your bliss, what look like walls, and he put his hands up like this. He said, what look like walls turn into doors. And I'll never forget the way he did his hands.
Wow.
What are walls turn into doors? And it's true. It's like doors open. You walk and it's like walking through walls. It really is. The doors open, but look like walls turn into doors if you're following your bliss. So I know I got T-shirts after that series came out. People, little refrigerator magnets that said, "Follow your bliss, chocolate, chocolate, chocolate," and follow your, all kinds of funny things. But there's a deep truth there. It's not the same. Following your bliss is not the same as just doing what you want to do. It's this deep love that guides you. And I think that's what ties it all together. Satchitananda, being, consciousness, bliss. And that's certainly what Campbell thought. And anyway, it was just
totally true. It's about what he said in some ways, and which is the core of the whole philosophy of Vedanta and Satchitananda and so on. Is it's an integration of acceptance, gratitude, faith, and courage, which just has to come up for you, which is not about yourself. It's about a much larger entity, which is a larger self. And that's really what we are talking about. Yeah. So Ujjwal, I leave it to you if you would like to sort of take it to the logic.
Sure.
Close. Yeah.
Sure. So Betty Sue, one question regarding, you mentioned about Thomas Keating. So that book, that Heartfulness Transformation in Christ, how does one get it? I'm trying to find it, but it's not easily available.
It was a bunch of videos that I did with him.
Oh, wow.
And so I think it's free now on the internet. I think they put it up in contemplative outreach. Anyway, look up Heartfulness, Thomas Keating, and it's a series of interviews that I did with him.
Okay.
And so, when you do interviews with someone like that, it's not about your questions or anything else. The reason that I was needed there was so it could be edited, because when you edit something, you cut away to the interviewer so that you can, so all the needed people were the cutaways. So really, he just talked in a way for a number of days. And anyway, it was, that was a blessing. He was an amazing person, and he had with him always a priest who kept him out of trouble, because he was always about to say something that would have gotten him in trouble with the Vatican. So I did a lot of editing on that one. And mostly it had to do with the acceptance of other religions and other, because really he was a mystic at
Yes.
heart. So
Yeah.
anyway, it was great fun working with him. And of course, working with all these people, they all have so much in common. You, after a while, it just seems like family. You know, you see, you meet someone and say, oh,
Yeah.
here's someone else in my family. Yeah, I know you.
Have you worked with the
Right.
Dalai Lama?
What? No,
Have you
no,
worked?
not directly, but I've worked with someone. In fact, I just got his book where the Dalai Lama wrote a foreword. Who works with the human rights, and so I was working with. He was working in Bosnia during the war there. So the Dalai
Okay.
Lama, he worked with the Dalai Lama. So, and also one of the physicists I know who's worked with the Dalai Lama in the Mind Science Foundation. So it's like I
Yes.
know 6 or 7 people who work with the Dalai Lama. I'm not one of them, but I admire him greatly.
He's an
Okay. But
amazing guy, isn't he? Yeah.
yeah, but here is you know, it just the way you explain and the whole your humility and the way you have you know, shared your uh, life stories, life about stories and stories of life. It gives me one of the indications of coaching competencies here, Ram. I'm sure you would agree that as coaches, some of the best coaching happens when coach do not attempt and mostly remains invisible. And if he or she is required to step
Yeah.
in, they
Yeah.
just make a question or make a comment and
Yeah.
then again go back. So
Yeah.
it's not about the coach, it's about the client.
Yeah.
So what I see a great quality in you, the same very coaching quality that at many places you never came forward to take credit. You spoke about Joseph Campbell, Bill Moyers, and Thomas Keating, and Otto Scharmer, Peter Senge everywhere, but you always are okay to be in the background and you're very humbly shared all of that. So that has personally moved me a lot. I would like to acknowledge that.
Thank
Yeah.
you. No, it could be a form of selfishness, usual, that I stay in the background, because once you're in the foreground, you get sometimes you get put in a box. I know people
Hmm.
like likes and celebrityhood and all that, but I once was hanging out with the actor Kirk Douglas. It's a long
Yeah.
story. I ended up going into a meeting with him. He had asked me to help him with some Texas oil people. It's a long story. He was one of my students in
Oh,
a
wow.
Aspen seminar. Anyway, so and I was going into this thing, and all at once he was mobbed. He couldn't go any further. All I had to
Hmm.
do, and I was mobbed with him, but who knew me? Nobody. All I had to do to get out of that mob and go have dinner was just take 2 steps backwards, and then I was free. And since then, I've known a whole lot of famous people. In fact, my partner is one. And when we walk down the street, we can't go out to eat that much because people come up and bother him. And he's very gracious. I'm just saying, once you become known, you are no longer free
Mm.
in a way that you have to live out this role that and sometimes it's I well, I've just seen enough of it that so I'm just saying thank you for that compliment, but it could be sheer selfishness on my part. I want to keep playing at a lot of playgrounds, and you know it's
Yeah.
fine. I don't see any advantage unless you have one thing you want to preach and you have one message and you get famous and then you're willing to repeat yourself uh, the rest of your life. I'm too selfish for that. But I would
Yeah.
like to make a little footnote with what you said about it's about the client. It's actually about the relationship too. The job of the coach is such a blessed job because it's actually about the relationship and it's as much about you as about the client, although not
Yes.
directly. So it's a blessed job. Anyone who has it is lucky to have it. If you're not working at it, if you know what I mean. If you're being blessed by it. I remember so many stories about Jung when he had his analyses, uh, how he depended on synchronicity to solve some problems. That one woman was telling a story, and she was telling a dream about a scarab or something, and she was very stuck in her issues. And at that moment, a scarab, a beetle, actually just walked across the windowsill, and all he had to do was just point at it, and then
Wow.
something in her, seeing the magic of that synchronicity, just lifted. I remember once when I was having a hard time explaining to my students what it would be like to live in a world in which the goddess, like Athena, would appear to you in the form of an owl. Imagine if any moment you could be walking along and you'd see an owl, and that could be Athena. What would it be to live in such a magical world? At that point, we were up on the second floor. A girl in the class leapt up and she said, she interrupted. She just said, "Look, an owl." And there was an owl in the crook of a tree. And the whole class just stood up and rushed to the window. In that just brief moment, we modern, cynical, the modern, cynical kids, with their iPhones, they
Yeah.
had that experience just that long, but it was enough. And there was a sense of magic that lasted such a little time. After that, I told that to a colleague of mine. He said, "Well, next year you ought to plant a stuffed owl in the tree." No, that wouldn't be magic. That would be stagecraft. And that's, that is that's kind of a temptation of coaches and others. If you know something works, you tend to do it again. I do. I just gave you a little exercise that I've done many times. The most profound seminar I was ever in by someone with a bunch of Japanese, and he couldn't speak a word of Japanese, and I was just there to help him write a book. So I was sitting in the background, and all these Japanese businessmen, very straight-laced, were sitting in a circle, and the interpreter didn't show up. What are you going to
Oh
do?
my God.
You're all you can speak is English. Everyone there can't speak English. They're all Japanese. What are you going to do? He just looked at each one of them, one by one, with such love in his eyes, no words. This was the first meeting. He didn't even know their names. He looked at each one with such love that one by one, each of them started crying. So here, with no words, was a profoundly transformative moment of all these Japanese businessmen, there were about 15 of them, crying together. I've never seen anything like it. Okay, I just say that because if you can be courageous enough to be open to what emerges in the moment, and I never am when I'm giving a workshop, I never am, I have it planned. Magic happens.
Yeah. So it's like let go to let come.
Yes, but be very present. It's not,
Yes,
it's
very
not,
present.
it's there, but we don't see it,
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So we have Harish also on the panel. Harish, would you like to come in and check with Betty Sue on anything that you want to?
Thank you, Ujjwal. It was a pleasure listening to Betty. I think the authenticity with which she has been sharing her experience and her journeys, life stories, have been really moving. Thank you very much, Betty. I really loved listening to you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Betty Sue. I think it's remarkable, and I know that there's a lot more wisdom where it comes from, and you certainly have said that you are not putting yourself forward, and you would like to be there at the back. But it's been a wonderful sharing, and we are truly honored to have you here and talk to us and share with us. Ujjwal, if you'd like to, close. Yeah.
Sure. No, just joining Ram in thanking you from the bottom of our hearts, and thank you for your time, energy, and the presence that you have offered. I think it's not only a testimony of who you are, but it's also an example for us. Well, perhaps I have some more stories to tell my daughter, about, because she was curious how it would go and what would she say and all that. I think the recording will do that service, but I'm going to go and tell her that it was a great being with you today. Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you for the
Thank you,
opportunity.
Betty Sue.
Most welcome.
Bye. Take care.
Most welcome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Betty Sue. You have a great day ahead.
You too.
Thank you.